Happy Maker Monday, y'all. I've gotten some requests for beginning quilting. I used to do a series about quilting that you can do with kids. Things that are kind of, this is where you should start if you want to learn how to do quilts. And this episode is definitely one of those projects. One of the very first quilts I made, even long before I learned how to actually quilt correctly, was a rag quilt. The term by itself, rag quilt, doesn't sound that appealing, but it is an easy technique. It's pretty straightforward. There's no ironing. And I'm going to show you a couple of tips that make the process easier. The hardest part about rag quilting is the ragging it itself. If you don't have carpal tunnel at the beginning of that, you're likely to get it by the end. So what I'm going to show you is step by step how to do a rag quilt with flannel. You can rag quilt with cotton. There's no reason not to. If you like that really fuzzy, cozy, sitting by the fireplace reading a book kind of quilt though, a flannel rag quilt will not only get you there quick, but it'll give you that feeling that you want. So what you need is either, I like layer cakes of flannels because they're already 10-inch squares, or you can do this with 5-inch squares. You can start with fat quarters. You can start with, you know, if you have some flannel pieces laying around or yardage laying around, you can cut your squares. 10-inch squares is usually kind of the good jumping off point, mostly because you can already get layer cakes that are already flannel. I've put some on today's sale, so if you want to just go quick and dirty, that's a good way to go. Some people like to have various squares on the back. Some people like to match their back so their back is all one color. Depending on the size of a quilt you want to make, if you want to make a throw quilt or a twin size quilt, I would get a layer cake, which is about 40 to 42 squares for your front, and then a couple yards of flannel for the back, and then cut squares to be the same size so that your back is all one solid color and all of your patchwork is on the front. That is entirely up to you. I put some things on today's sale so you can grab the right fabric to do the right process, but that's up to you. What I did was I had some fat quarters laying around of some fun plaid flannels. I cut them into 9-inch squares. I cut 9-inch squares because I had fat quarters, and fat quarters are 18 inches wide, so I got 4 squares out of each fat quarter. So I have a sort of blue-green and a sort of greeny-orange. So these are the 2 colors that we're going to alternate on our front, and then on our back I have a red, white, and blue. So these are the colors of the little quilt we're going to make, just as a sample. I've cut these into 9-inch squares. For this technique, I like cotton batting. This is Quilter Select Request batting because it's really thin. This quilt's gonna be warm. Not only are you using flannel, which is already a thicker cotton, but cotton batting is the warmest of the battings because it keeps the warmth in. So this quilt isn't gonna be super fluffy, but it's gonna be nice and warm. So whatever size block you cut, I cut a 9-inch square for my fabric. I cut 7-inch squares of batting. You want your batting to be 2 inches smaller than the size of your square. So if you have a 10-inch square, if you're starting layer cakes, cut 8-inch squares of batting. You can do this with any batting that you have laying around, if you've got scraps laying around, or just pick up a yard or so of a thin cotton batting. If you're going to use scraps, try to keep the same type and thickness. You don't want wool in one block and cotton in another block and 80-20 in another block, because then the thickness is different, and those are going to shrink a little bit differently in the wash. Okay, so here we go. Let me flip my camera and I will show you the next steps. All right, so the first thing you're going to need, I'm using a friction pen because this will come off with heat. If you don't want to do any ironing, you can use an air erase pen or a wash away pen, because you're going to have to wash this anyway, so a wash away pen will wash out in the washing. I find that my friction pen just shows up better for filming, so that's why we're going to use a friction pen. You need a ruler that's longer than your block. So like I was going to start with my 12-inch ruler. It's not quite long enough to go from corner to corner. So now I've got my 24-inch ruler. So I'm going to lay this on my block, and I'm just going to make an X. from both corners. And you're going to do this on all, I'm going to show you a couple different ways. You're going to do this on all of your squares. If you're not against the idea of ironing, you can also press these lines in, which is what I'm going to show you an example of that right now. So you can do whichever way you prefer. So you can either mark your X, or you can do, I had to go grab this, I forgot to bring it over here. Or you can press the lines of your X. That's up to you. You do whichever you prefer. Personally, this might go a little faster, the pressing, but if you're doing this with a kid and you don't want to deal with an iron, then I would get the pen out and just mark your squares. Okay, so we're going to take both of these. We've got, now flannels don't have a right and wrong side, so it doesn't matter which way you put them up. We're going to put our backing fabric down first. We're going to center our square in the middle. You should have 1 inch all the way around. Then we're going to take our, I'm going to use the marked piece. We're going to take the one we drew the X on, and we're going to line them up with the back piece. Okay? Put pins in stuff, because as you stitch this, it might move. You don't have to pin it to death, but 2 pins usually gets you there. So if you're going to do the pressed one, then you put a backing piece down. Put your piece in the middle, or your batting in the middle, and then put your pressed piece down. So again, as long as you line up your back piece and your front piece, you should be okay. Here's the beauty of this technique. If this doesn't line up perfectly, you're never going to know the difference once you wash this, because I'm going to go ahead and make this sample up. I'm going to take it home and wash it and show you the before and after. You won't notice. So like if this is just, I cut this one this way on purpose. Well, that's not the one. I have one in there. It's crooked on purpose. If this is off just a little bit, you're not going to see it when it's finished. Okay, so now we're going to talk some sewing tips on this. Okay, a couple of tips on the sewing. I'm going to use a foot I can see through. I like my J foot for this because there's a little dashed line right there that lines up with my needle when my needle's in the middle position. You want to be able to know where you're going to stitch, because you're going to stitch right on this line. I also will increase the length of my stitch just a little bit to like a 3.5. That's going to give it more of a hand quilting look, and it's going to move through the machine just a little bit better. You don't really have to worry about tie-off stitches if you don't want to, but if it makes you more comfortable, you can do a tie-off at the beginning and the end of your stitching. We are going to join these to each other, so those beginning, starting, and stitching spots are going to get locked down. Now, again, this is a really good project to do with kids because it really doesn't matter if you sew it super straight. All right, because if it gets a little weird or wonky or off kilter, it doesn't actually matter that much. Because when we wash this, it's all going to go together. It doesn't really matter because it's all going to zhuzh up. It's all going to pucker up. It's going to be beautiful no matter what you do. So we're just going to sew all of our blocks together with a big X like this. Okay, pretty easy peasy. So I'm going to sew the rest of my blocks together, and I'm going to come back and show you how to sew them to each other. All right, so again, if you're sewing with kids and you want to give them kind of a reference for this part, you can mark a line 1 inch away from the edge of your block. You can kind of feel where the batting ends right there. So depending on your skill set, especially if you're sewing with little ones, I would be inclined to give them a line to match up to. But we're going to take our backing pieces and put our backing pieces right sides together. You can pin this if you like, but the flannel kind of sticks to each other, so you don't really have to worry about that too much. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. This is not heirloom patchwork here. But get your pieces all lined up together. As a tip, if you feel like your fabric isn't moving through smooth enough, you might want to put a walking foot on. Some machines don't have strong enough feed dogs to move this many layers of flannel. Most newer machines do, but if you feel like you're sewing through this and you're making really little stitches, or your fabric's getting kind of bogged down, try using a walking foot, and then you'll probably get a better result anyway. So we're going to sew right along that line that we made, which is 1 inch away from the edge. And since I want mine to be kind of like alternating squares, I'm just going to sew 2 together, and then I'm going to crisscross them. So, sorry, I'm trying to do this with one hand because I don't have a filmer today. So we're going to line up another set. The back pieces are together. I know this seems weird because you're going to have exposed edges, but that's okay. You're going to see how it works in a second. I tend to like to just line everything up and chain stitch everything, but you do however makes you comfortable. Okay, so we're going to sew all of our blocks together, and then I'm going to show you how to join them. And if you get a little pucker like that, again, it's okay. Okay, so what we've got is, I'm just going to make a 4-patch here. So I've got 2 matching pieces sewn together. So there's a green and there's an orange. So I'm going to flip these so that they make a 4-patch. All your raw edges are up now. They're on the top part of the quilt. So we're going to put them right side, you're going to put them back sides together. This is why I like having one piece, one color on the back, because it makes it look kind of like a whole cloth quilt, but you don't have to. You can totally mix them up if you want to. So we're going to match the seams up like this. I'm going to spread the seams open because this is a lot of layers of fabric for your machine to get through. And then I'm going to pin this sort of out of the way so that I don't have to worry about this when I go to sew it. Okay. Long pins are really helpful for this process. Then we're going to do just like we did here, and we're going to sew 1 inch away down the whole thing. All right, so I'm going to sew all of these together, and when I get to the point where I'm going to intersect all of these parts, you might want to slow down just a little bit because, again, there's a lot of layers here. But another tip I like to give people when you're doing this process is your stitching should kind of cross where that V of stitching is made. I back stitch at this seam a little bit right here. Just a couple of stitches. Just where those 2 pieces come together, because there's a lot of strain that gets put on those seams, and you want this to stay together. Because if you put this together the right way, it's going to last a really long time. All right, so we're going to sew all of our blocks together, and now I'm going to show you the trick on the cutting. Okay, so now we have, let me zoom this out. We've got this big sort of patchworked flannel thing. Couple of tips. This is a really good time for cotton thread and a new needle because you're going to go through lots of layers. Now, how I had learned to do this was to just take a pair of scissors and snip through all the layers. Does that work? Yes, it does. Does it hurt your fingers? You betcha. So, a couple of things that I do when I snip. I snip right there at the edge of that piece. And then I also will snip inside of here because that's going to keep that fraying going. That's why I like to backstitch inside that space so that these stay together after you snip them. Okay. These are going to fray up really nicely when you get done with them. But like I said, this technique of using regular scissors gets real old real fast on these hands. These scissors though, these are snips with a spring inside them. So not only can they go through a lot of layers, they are just the right length that you don't cut anywhere near that, that stitch line. You do not want to cut through your stitch line. That's a bad move. But I cut them about 3/4 of an inch. And that spring action makes all the difference in this process because it's very easy to get through all of these layers. I do have another pair of spring action snips that are longer. So if you can trust yourself not to cut into where those seam allowances are, I'm going to put those on the sale today too, because they're really great. They're just longer, so you're more likely to cut into that. If you've got little ones, they're more likely to cut into that seam allowance. But, you know, if you know what you're doing, I would highly recommend the purple handled ones because they're nice and long, so they will snip all the way into this. Okay, so you're just going to go around your whole quilt and snip to about 1/4 of an inch away from the sewing line. And make sure that you go all the way to the edge of your quilt as well. Another thing that you will probably want to do, which I forgot to do on my sewing, is sew a stay stitch all the way around the outside of your quilt, just so then you can rag the edges as well. All right, so I'm going to snip all the rest of this, and I'm going to take it home and wash it, and then I'm going to show you the final result. After thinking about it, I went and got my hands on my purple snips, which I love these snips. I just want to show you the difference. So these are much longer than these. So again, if you're working with kids, you might want to go with the smaller size. But if you're a grown person and you can handle a nice pair of scissors, these snips are amazing. Not only will they cut through all of these layers like butter, but the spring action on them and the way the nose is shaped, you don't have to even really worry about getting through the stitching line because it's kind of like a little training wheel. So I just wanted to show you both pair of snips because these really are a game changer, especially if your hands get tired really fast. And I mean, honestly, doing this process, whose hands wouldn't get tired? But check this out. Look at how sexy these scissors are. So even cutting through 4 layers of flannel, oh, wait a minute. Got some lint in there. Okay, even cutting through all these layers of flannel, it's just like butter. Okay, so I am going to take this home now and I am going to wash it and I will bring it back tomorrow to show it off. So we are back from the washer and dryer. This is what it looks like when it's done. Okay, so since the back is all the same fabric, this looks like it's one solid piece. The front, though, has the 2 different colors. This is how it frays up. It's plenty quilted. It's nice and soft and squishy and cozy. This is just a really small sample of what you can do. A couple of tips with the washing. I just throw it in the washing machine on warm. Wash it like I normally would anything else in the washing machine. I don't do any weird settings or anything. When you put this in the dryer though, if it's anything bigger than like a baby quilt, I would strongly suggest that halfway through the drying, you clean out your lint trap. This not only makes a lot more lint than regular cotton will because it's flannel, but all these little threads that are coming off will end up in your lint trap too. Plus, sometimes the batting shows just a little bit, and that gives off a lot of lint if it's exposed to the washing machine. But don't freak out, it's not that bad. Just about halfway through the drying process, or I don't know, 30 minutes in or whatever, just clean out your lint trap. Anything that's loose from here will come off in the dryer, and then it's ready to wash, it's ready to wear, it's ready to use, it's ready to wrap some cozy little bundle of baby up in. Okay, so hot tips to take away from this. It's easy. You sew squares. Those purple snips, again, are my favorite snips for doing this process. But if you're working with little people and you're afraid that they might cut through the seam allowance, the red handled snips are better because the spring action that's in those is a lot easier on your hand. It's really the only things you need to remember with flannel quilts and the washing tips. All right, so the stuff that I used is in the comments. And go make you a rag quilt. It's a whole bunch of fun.